Welcome to Whisky Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1021 for September 11th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
Every single lot in the auction is a genuine one-off, which means basically that it has never been offered commercially before, it will never be offered commercially again, and moreover, it has unparalleled provenance.
Distillers around Scotland are joining forces to raise money for youth programs in Scotland through the Distillers Charity One of One auction next month. They're donating unique one-of-a-kind bottlings to be auctioned off on October 5th in Edinburgh. That includes a few debut whiskies like the new Candleblanc single malt from master blender Dhaval Gandhi. I'll talk with Dhaval about his latest project, and we'll also hear from Beanie Gerates-Espy of the Distillers Charity about the auction later on Whisky Cast in Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's Whisky Cast.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of Whisky Cast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Bruichladdich is out with 6 new malts for the fall, including this year's Octomore series, the 11th edition of Black Art, and the 2013 Beer Barley Single Malt. That one comes from ancient strains of barley grown at an experimental farm on Orkney, and Bruichladdich is the only distillery making whiskey from beer barley, which dates back more than 2,000 years. Head distiller Adam Hannett says it's tough to work with, but well worth the effort.
The farmers in Orkney would talk about getting less yield, but we talk about getting more flavour. And so when we think about whiskey, I always say when we're looking to make whiskey, we're looking to represent flavour, we're looking to understand that. So we want to use these varieties. They are more expensive for us to buy. They are more difficult for the farmers to grow. They're more difficult for us to make whiskey from. And we sacrifice, we make less whiskey from them. But we get amazing flavour. So is it really a sacrifice? I would say not, because in the entire history of making whiskey, nobody in the entire history has raised a glass to their nose, nosed it and said, that's a really efficient whiskey. That's not what people think about when they drink whiskey. That's not what we think about when we make it. That's what the accountants think about once we've made it, but by then it's too late. We've already made it, and it's really... And that's why we keep all our accounting team in Glasgow away from us on the island, so the work's already done by the time they get the bill.
This year's Octomore releases include 2 whiskies peated to 128.9 parts per million of phenols. 14.1 was matured in ex-bourbon casks, while 14.2 was matured in a combination of Oloroso sherry and Amarone wine casks. 14.3 is the annual Isla barley release from grain grown on Isla's Octomore farm and was peated to 214.2 parts per million. Of course, this year's Black Art, as always, comes from an undisclosed combination of casks. I'll have tasting notes for all of them soon at the WhiskyCast website. Tomatin is releasing a 3-bottle collection of whiskies finished in Italian wine casks. The Italian collection features Marsala, Amarone, and Barolo cask finishes. All 3 are bottled at 46% ABV with no chill filtering and carry a recommended retail price of £70 each. Berry Brothers and Rudd is focusing on Speyside whiskies with its fall release of 8 different bottlings. The range includes 2 Linkwoods, a 2013 and a 2010 Christmas edition, along with whiskies from Balmenic, Glenlossie, and Dufton. Prices range from £75 a bottle for the Linkwood 2013 and Glenlossie whiskies to £1,000 for the 1975 Dufton. And Lagavulin is releasing its annual Isla Jazz Festival bottling. The Lagavulin Jazz 2023 15-year-old is finished in Oloroso sherry casks. It'll only be available at the distillery on Isla for 250 pounds a bottle. The Lagavulin Isla Jazz Festival runs from the 15th through the 19th on the island. In other news, Jack Daniel's is phasing out its standard rye whiskey in favor of a new bottled-in-bond offering. Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye will be available globally, and the first batch is a 7-year-old rye distilled in the spring of 2016. Master distiller Chris Fletcher calls it a logical progression for the distillery's rye range.
Anything that's 100 proof from us could be bottled in bond, as long as we don't mix the seasons, obviously. So, it was something that, I think maybe we didn't really, I won't say we overlooked, but didn't necessarily think top of mind. As the American whiskey, market has evolved over the last 10 years, I would argue that the bottle and bond regulation is probably more important today for a lot of reasons than it was back in 1897 when it was passed. And so all of those things, combined with the success of our other bottle and bond offerings that we launched last year, it really became a bit of a no-brainer. I said, don't overthink this one, right? Kind of at the beginning. And, we feel really, really excited about moving our rye whiskey into the bonded package.
Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye will carry a recommended retail price of $31.99 in the U.S. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Kentucky's New Riff Distilling is coming out with its first sour mash single malt whiskey. The distillery started laying down barrels of malt shortly after opening in 2014, and this whiskey comes from barrels between 7 and 8 years old using 6 different mash bills. It'll be available starting next month with a recommended retail price of $69.99 a bottle. Texas's Milam and Green Whiskey is coming out with the second annual release of Unabridged, its blend of whiskeys from Tennessee, Kentucky, and their own Texas distillate. The mash bill for both the Kentucky and Tennessee whiskeys includes malted rye, which master distiller Marlene Holmes says adds some extra texture to the final whiskey.
Believe it or not, I loved Volume 1. I bought all of the bottles that was in my local liquor store of Volume 1 that was available. I liked it that much. Volume 2 is even better. So the difference is there's a little bit older Tennessee whiskey in Volume 2, just a few casks. And then some of the Kentucky whiskey as well is a little bit older also.
Unabridged Volume 2 will carry a recommended retail price of $94.99 a bottle when it goes on sale online this Wednesday. It's already at select retailers in the U.S. and Alberta. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. In Irish whiskey news, Irish Distillers is releasing a cask-strength version of Powers John's Lane. The initial release is an exclusive to the Palace Bar in Dublin before a wider release. There's no word on pricing. And while we'll be talking about the One of One charity auction in a few minutes, there's another one I want to get on your radar. Our good friend Charles McLean is working with the folks at Whisky.auction to raise money for the McLean Foundation, a clean water charity Charles and his sons have founded. Charles got whiskey makers to donate rare bottles from their archives, and the auction will also feature rare whiskey books from the collections of many of today's top whiskey writers. It runs through this Tuesday. We have a link for details at the WhiskeyCast website. And finally, Glen Grant's new 21-year-old single malt took top honors among attendees at this year's Whiskey Fringe in Edinburgh, voted the winner of the Spirit of Whiskey Fringe Award. Aberlour 18-year-old was the runner-up, with Tomatin 18 coming in third. In fact, 5 of the top 10 whiskeys were 18-year-old expressions. You can find my tasting notes for the Glen Grant 21 at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskeyCast.
It's a busy month for whiskey events around the world, so let's dive into our events calendar for a look at what's happening. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival leads this coming weekend's events. It runs from the 15th through the 17th in Bardstown, Kentucky. Bourbon and Beyond takes place just up Interstate 65 in Louisville from the 14th through the 17th. Whiskey Palatina is on the 15th and 16th in Eiseltham, Germany. And Saturday brings us the Liverpool Whiskey Festival in England and Sagamore Spirits Whiskey on the Waterfront Party in Baltimore, Maryland. The Scotch Malt Whiskey Society holds its annual gatherings in Washington, D.C. on the 19th and in San Francisco on the 21st. Just Whiskey takes place in Hamburg, Germany on the 22nd and 23rd. And the Whiskey Show is in London on September 30th and October 1st. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Scotland's distillers are teaming up for the second one-of-one charity auction on October 5th, with 39 one-of-a-kind whiskies supplied directly by the distilleries. The proceeds will benefit the distillers' charity Youth Action Fund, which supports programs helping youth around Scotland. We'll hear from Daval Gandhi in a few minutes. He's releasing his first Cando Blanc whiskey as part of the auction. But first, let's hear from Beanie Gerates Espy, the distillers' charity's managing director.
So the Distillers One of One was inaugurated in 2021, December 2021. And it was really following in the footsteps of a series of smaller charity auctions that had been organized by the distillers, but that arrived at a crunch point and they were reassessing the future of the charity auction market and decided to work with a new auction partner, which is Sotheby's. Sotheby's, as you'll be well aware, is very well versed in this space, having run Napa Wine Auction and Hospice de Beaune for several years. And there was basically a sort of meeting of minds between Sotheby's and the distillers team that there really was the opportunity to create an auction of truly rare and remarkable spirits. And thus was born the concept of one of one, where every single lot in the auction is a genuine one-off, which means basically that it has never been offered commercially before, it will never be offered commercially again, and moreover, has unparalleled provenance. No previous owner. These auction pieces come directly from the distillery to us. So they are the first and only opportunity for collectors to get their hands on them. So the concept was born, as I said, in early 2021. And the first auction took place in December with a ambitious target of raising in excess of £1 million, which in the context of whiskey auctions up until this point was a huge sum. They raised £2.4 million, or nearly $3,000 US. So it kind of blew everyone's mind. I think both the huge amount of effort and commitment that the donors were prepared to put into a concept like this, but also the huge excitement that existed, latent excitement that existed amongst the global collector base for items of this rarity. But of course, underpinning all of this is the fact that this is first and foremost a charity auction. It's the single largest charity auction of Scotch whisky. And yeah, that was really the thrust. The driving force was, how do we raise money for people in our communities? And I think just to backtrack for a second, the distillers as a guild or London livery company has existed for several hundred years. Charity has been an important part of livery life and livery membership since the 1950s. But with the one of one, we really upped the ante and created something that was suddenly able to make, really transformative sums of money. So in a short space of time, the concept evolved quite rapidly. And now we're looking ahead to the second auction. So with the first one, as I mentioned, was in 2021. The second auction will be in 2023. And, sincerely, we hope this is the concept that may yet run and run. Napa and Hospice and various other events have been going for several decades. So we see no reason why the Distillers 101, may not yet run for several years. So we're really at the beginning of a very exciting journey.
Where does the money go?
So, as I mentioned, charity's been an important part of Livery Life for a long time. The Distillers Charities existed since the 1950s in some guise or other. But in the last couple of years, the Distillers Charity has sort of transformed itself into an entirely independent charitable organization. And within the charity, we've created a restricted fund called the Youth Action Fund. And the majority of the proceeds that are generated by the auction flow into the Youth Action Fund, which is all about transforming the lives of young people in Scotland. So it's really an auction of Scotch whisky in Scotland that has the power to affect transformative change in young people. And principally, that's about helping young people find pathways to employment and a more prosperous future, because 1 in 4 young people in Scotland is living on the poverty line. Youth unemployment is very high. And the pandemic has obviously exacerbated that significantly. So the timing is absolutely crucial. And what's really powerful is just in a few short months, the impact we've been able to make since we started to make grants at the beginning of 2022.
Give me a sense of the whiskies that will be up for auction.
Well, actually, we just announced one today, which is a spectacular Brora, one of the oldest Brora whiskies ever released. We've got 36 donors coming across from the length and breadth of Scotland. Obviously, we've got some very large household names, well known to the international collector base. We've got a lovely donation from Bowmore. We've got something from Pernod Ricard. We've got something from Glenglassel, which is part of the Brown-Forman stable. So we've got some significant players that are well known. But actually, what's lovely is there's representation from donors across the board. So, as I said, 36 distilleries will together donate 39 lots to the auction. So it's a blend of very, very old, very rare whiskies, which obviously will fetch very exciting price points, but also some younger, newer whiskies that are sort of making their name. And in fact, we've got one distillery that is launching its very first ever whiskey at the auction. So it's not necessarily just about super old whiskey. It's also about these, just as I mentioned at the beginning, these genuinely one-off pieces. So the first ever whiskey from the Holyrood distillery will be launched at the 1 of 1, for example. So it's a really interesting and sort of eclectic group of whiskies. But what sets them all apart, as I mentioned, is that each one is genuinely a unique liquid and uniquely presented in a way that makes it sort of truly sort of rarefied and hopefully very exciting for collectors.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, I think it's worth pointing out that we're hosting the event on the outskirts of Edinburgh. So obviously the event is happening in Scotland. We're bringing together, not just the donors, but there's also a raft of fantastic sponsors who are helping us to make this a reality. Uniquely in the charity auction space, we are actually giving 100% of the hammer price to charity. So whatever is bid on the day will flow into the hands of our charity beneficiaries. So that's a really exciting thing to be able to do. It's very demonstrable on the night. If someone bids $100,000 or £100,000, that's going directly to charity. But it also means that we need the support of our sponsors to make the event happen. So it's very much a community event. And there's a real sense of kind of collective endeavour of, the whole kind of community in Scotland, not just the whiskey distilleries themselves, but actually other people within the industry, playing their role as well in making it come together. So Yeah, it's a lovely collective endeavor. That's the term we use a lot, but it really kind of encapsulates it beautifully.
Are you going to unveil any other additions to the auction between now and October 2nd?
There will all be, the auction's actually on October the 5th, and the full lot listing will be available on the Sotheby's.com website on the 14th of September. If people are following our social channels, they'll be seeing a steady reveal of lots. We've already started to reveal a number already. Old Pulteney, beautiful Bellwave launch release. We've got a lovely piece from House of Hazelwood. I mean, we've got, if you go to our Instagram channel, you'll see already a flow of lot information, but the full lot listing will be available on the 14th of September. So people can peruse the catalogue ahead of time and register to bid, because although space is quite limited at the event itself, obviously we welcome online bidders from all over the world. And in fact, one of the reasons that the event is held at lunchtime is because we recognise there'll be bidders dialing in from the US and the Far East, and that enables us to give a platform to everybody who wants to participate.
This week, Dhaval Gandhi unveiled his design and Whisky Studios' contribution to the auction, the debut bottling of Cando Blanc Aga. It's a blend of two 1979 single casks in a decanter that blends glass and metal working art forms. It's Dhaval's first project since leaving the Lakes Distillery earlier this year. First of all, tell me about Cando Blanc. This is a new project for you, isn't it?
Yes, Mark. First of all, thank you for having me. Cando Blanc is my attempt at colliding the worlds of contemporary art and whiskey.
How so?
So, the way I always envisioned is there is more to whiskey than just being the bottle. It's an entire object that works in unison. Think about this like an Apple product, like an iPhone, where the software and hardware go hand in hand. And this is very much like that. It's taking contemporary art, blending it with amazing whiskeys to create an object that works as a whole, and looking at it from a holistic perspective.
How did you do that with this edition?
So for Cando Blancs, the first object that we created, which we'll be donating to the Distillers 101 auction, we decided to take inspiration from Japan and Italy. Now, we took the Batuto technique from Italian Murano glassmakers and kintsugi from Japanese craftsmanship, and blended together to create a sort of a juxtaposition of East and West. And that's what the object is. Now, more importantly, the liquid is also a juxtaposition of two different styles. For that, I created a blend using 1979 single casks. So two single casks, which were, one was very tropical fruit oriented, beautiful notes of pineapple, melons, light vanilla, and with a textural quality coming from a refill hogshead, which gives it exotic spices, incense, and a waxy character that I always prize in any of the whiskeys.
Why do this now? You were working with Lakes Distillery, and I know you wanted to go out on your own, but why do this now?
So for me, I've always enjoyed making whiskey at Lakes, but for me, I always seek creative challenges. And more importantly, it was the right timing, because for us, the Distillers 101 auction gives us an opportunity to go hand in hand with all the iconic whiskey makers to create something that impacts our community. So the object has been created and it's been donated to the auction, and all the proceeds will go to Scottish charities. Now, the reason for doing this, because, for us, when I came to the whiskey world, I encountered a lot of friends and family and also mentors who have helped me along the journey. So I made a resolution that whenever I was in a position and I had an opportunity to give back to the community, I would do so. And for us, there was no better time to launch the brand with a good cause. And that's why we decided to go and launch at the Distillers 101 auction.
When will you launch a version for the rest of us?
There are a lot of exciting plans in the works. We are already working with various private clients for the special orders. Watch this space. Something coming soon.
How have you been doing otherwise? What have you been working on?
So there are two things. When I said I was looking for creative challenges. I set up Studio Double Gandhi. So Studio Double Gandhi focuses more on helping other distilleries and focusing on the concepts that I have pioneered in whiskey making or sherry cask. So that's what it focuses on. And then there was this one question I always had about art and design, and a question that I always ask myself: can whiskey be art? Can I express ideas and thoughts through the language of whiskey? And I wanted to go more deeper into that and explore that even further. And that's where Cando Blanc comes in. And even the word Cando Blanc, Cando is inspired by the Japanese word, which means feelings of intense satisfaction when you see something that is beautifully designed. And Blanc comes from the elegant French taxonomy, and it means color white, and it also means transcendent qualities of art and expressionism and purity. So there you go. And the concept of duality, Mark, is very much ingrained within Cando Blanc. So every time we create an object, whether it's a liquid, whether it's an object, there's always a duality going on. So for example, our first object was about Italy and Japan. The liquids are also two different polar opposites. So we try to bring things together, and that is the very essence of Cando Blanc.
I'm curious how you accomplish this blend with two completely different whiskeys. Most times the blends are composed of multiple whiskeys to get just the right amount of flavor and the right flavor combinations. But with two whiskeys, you're sort of putting yourself into a bit of a box with it when it comes to what you can create, right?
Yes and no. I think that there can be creative challenges. I think when you use fewer whiskeys in a composition, it becomes more challenging to create the blend. But that is the fun part here. And I wanted to highlight both characters. The more different whiskeys you use, if you use different cask samples to create a composite, you sort of even out and balance certain flavors. I wanted to highlight those individual characteristics. And that's why for me, I wanted to focus on two. But I've looked at a number of samples, but out of those, there's two, both coming from single vintage 1979, and it will be bottled in 2023 for the auction. So 44 years old were quite important. And also the number 7 and 9 is very important for all my creations, whether it was Lakes. If you look at any of the Lakes bottles, the strength will always total to either 9. And that's number something that has been going on from a long time. So I wanted to play on that. And I was fortunate enough to work with some of the our partners in the whiskey industry and find the right whiskeys that will go for this composition.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
I think, for us, we hope that, the object, the liquid finds its home, and people get together at this amazing opportunity to, create a meaningful impact in our community through this auction. So, the more people that are aware about this auction, the more people that spread the word, it would be helpful. So we stand, with all of our fraternity of the whiskey fraternity, not in competition, but in solidarity for doing something meaningful.
Also this week, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society unveiled its contribution to the auction. The Only Drop took a 30-year-old single malt and divided its contents equally between a first-fill Oloroso hogshead and a first-fill PX hogshead, then reunited the two 3 years later for a one-of-a-kind bottling that comes in a bottle encased by a paper pulp sculpture that features wood shavings from the original casks. Once again, the Distillers One-of-One auction takes place October 5th at Edinburgh's Hopetoun House, and the Cando Blanc bottling will be one of those going on display between September 15th and 20th at Sotheby's in London. We have a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at the WhiskyCast website. That's WhiskyCast In Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the third and final release in Beam's Hardin's Creek, Kentucky series of bourbons. Hardin's Creek, Boston gets its name from the tiny town where the Booker No Distillery and warehouses are located. As with the previous Claremont and Frankfurt editions, this one is a 17-year-old bourbon bottled at 55% ABV and was distilled from the same batch as the Claremont and Frankfurt editions. The idea is to give it the Boston area's terroir. The nose is fruity and light on this one with touches of peaches, apricots, red apples, and dried flowers. The taste is thick and chewy with a slow build-up of black pepper, honey, and vanilla, complemented by peaches, apricots, and red apples. The finish is long and fruity with a touch of spice, and I'm scoring the Hardin's Creek Boston Bourbon a 93. Next up, the second edition of Milam & Green's Unabridged Bourbon. Like Volume 1 last September, Volume 2 is a blend of straight bourbons from Kentucky and Tennessee, along with Milam & Green's own Texas bourbon. This year's edition is bottled at 58.8% ABV, and the nose has touches of sandalwood, cardamom, honey, vanilla, figs, and a hint of cherry pipe tobacco. The taste is peppery and oaky with notes of black pepper, cloves, cardamom, oak tannins, black cherries, and dark chocolate. The finish is long with lingering spices and oak tannins. I'm scoring Milam & Green's Unabridged Volume 2 a 93. Now let's look at the new Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye we heard about during the news. It replaces the standard Jack Daniel's Tennessee Rye and is bottled at 50% ABV, of course. The nose is rich with toasted oak, baking spices, and dried fruits. The taste is syrupy thick with cinnamon, clove, and allspice notes that fade to reveal dried fruits, charred oak, honey, and vanilla. The finish is long with subtle spices and hints of peaches and red apples. I'm scoring the Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye a 92. And finally, the folks at Highwire Distilling in Charleston, South Carolina went all out for their 10th anniversary this weekend with a 4-year-old bottled in bond version of their landmark Jimmy Red Bourbon. The nose has notes of baking spices, honey, vanilla, and milk chocolate. The taste has a great balance of cinnamon, cumin, and allspice notes that fade to reveal dried fruits, honey, and vanilla. The finish is long and subtle with lingering spices and a touch of dried fruits. There's a lot of flavor to unpack here. I'm scoring the Highwire Distilling 10th Anniversary Jimmy Red Bourbon a 95. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like Pros Sync Putts. In fact, Whiskey Cast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
Let's open up the inbox now for this week's community segment presented by Waterford Whiskey. We had a lot of comments on last week's interview with Becky Paskin on the state of women in the whiskey world and the Our Whiskey Foundation survey. Lindsay Johnson posted this on LinkedIn. She runs the Camp Runamuck summer camp for bartenders each year in Kentucky. Here's what she wrote. As a woman who founded and operates the most high-profile U.S. trade event on the Bourbon Trail, I am constantly frustrated by how my team and I are left out of the conversation. I have on more than one occasion been told that our work doesn't matter because of my gender and my body. But no matter how many times it happens, I am floored. Courtney Christiana of Angel's Envy added this comment. I have been dismissed so many times by guests at the whiskey bar I used to work at, been asked, quote, "What are your credentials?" or outright mansplained to. Drinking whiskey alone at a bar while trying to enjoy dinner leads to interruptions from men. However, all my experiences with men in the industry have mostly been good. There have been a few times where my knowledge of whiskey and my career goals have intimidated a few men, which have prevented me from getting hired for certain roles. This fuels the fire within me. We also had some comments from men who recognized the problem. Here's what Mitch Gurewitz had to say. Personally, I hear stories of women running distilleries or having high-profile jobs in whiskey makes me want to support their bottles even more so. As a guy getting old, it sounds strange, but I can't wait for the old guys to die off and leave the culture to more advanced life forms. Andy and Bruce posted this comment from Australia in the WhiskyCast community app. Would be an option to test the attendees at a whiskey event as to only having an all-women brand event, where we have all brand tables represented by women, so there isn't an option to turn to a male. Interesting idea. Might be worth trying one day. If you have a take on this issue, or there is something else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google App Stores and join the conversation. You can also find us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter, or you can email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whisky, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskies. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhisky.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. Unless you're drinking a single-cask whiskey, every whiskey you drink has received the blender's touch. The blender's job is to extract the most flavor out of a whiskey while balancing inventory levels and trying to ensure consistency from batch to batch. There's also a big difference between blending for blended malts and single malts, as Weems Malt's master blender Isabella Weems explains.
They're so different because for the Weems Malts blends, I'm dealing with different types of spirit as well as different types of wood, so there are two variables, so it's actually a lot more complicated. When I buy the spirit, I'm thinking about how long it's going to take to mature to get to the right flavour profile to fit into my blend, and there may be different types of spirits which are available at different times, so it's actually much, much more complicated in terms of blending. While in King's Barnes, it's one type of spirit with various types of wood, so the excitement in that is how can I use those different types of wood to create the flavours that I want.
How do you create the different flavors with the woods?
That's a good question. Experience. We're still in the early days with King's Barnes, so I'm learning how the spirit, which is unique to us, matures in the different kinds of woods. So I'm being very careful about the woods I buy, making sure they're very light, they don't overpower the spirit, and we get this beautiful, elegant, balanced, classic lowland blend at the end of it.
Thanks to Isabella Weems for the explanation, and if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and Threads at WhiskyCast, or you can use the new WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023. and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.